On the bright cold morning of March 16, 1926, Robert H. Goddard, a 44-year-old physics professor, tramped out into a snow-covered cabbage field outside Auburn, Massachusetts, and began setting up a strange assembly of aluminium hoses and tanks. At 2:30 that afternoon, the contraption was ready, and with his wife and a handful of bystanders looking on, Goddard backed away to a safe distance and pulled on a long rope. An ear-splitting screech filled the air as a tongue of flame a foot long shot out of the device. At first, it clung stubbornly to the ground, but a few seconds later, it suddenly shot up and roared into the air, tracing a tall arc across the sky before streaking down and impacting the ground 200 feet away. In that moment, the world changed forever. Though Goddard's device had risen only 41 feet, that short flight was the first successful demonstration of a liquid-fueled rocket, an event as important to space exploration as the Wright Brothers' first flight in 1903 is to aviation. Every rocket built since, up to the mighty Saturn V that sent men to the moon, owes much of its design to Goddard's pioneering work. Yet despite its historic status, Goddard's 1926 rocket looks nothing like any rocket built before or since, being built upside down with its combustion chamber and nozzle at the top and propellant tanks at the bottom. But why on earth would Goddard build a rocket in this counterintuitive manner? Well, the reason has to do with the once common misunderstanding of physics known as the Pendulum Rocket Fallacy. Robert Hutchins Goddard's lifelong obsession with rocketry and spaceflight can be traced to a single time and place. On October the 19th, 1899, the 17-year-old Goddard was visiting his relatives outside his hometown of Worcester, Massachusetts, when he climbed up a cherry tree to trim some dead leaves. On reaching the top, he looked into the endless sky and suddenly found himself overcome by an overwhelming sense of awe and wonder. As he later wrote, "As I looked toward the fields at the east, I imagined how wonderful it would be to make some device which had even the possibility of ascending to Mars, and how it would look on a small scale if sent up from the meadow at my feet. I have several photographs of the tree taken since, with the little ladder I made to climb it, leaning against it. It seemed to me that a weight whirling around a horizontal shaft moving more rapidly above than below could furnish lift by virtue of the greater centrifugal force at the top of the path. I was a different boy when I descended the tree from when I ascended. Existence, at last, seemed very purposive." For the rest of his life, Goddard would celebrate October 19th as his anniversary day. Goddard completed his graduate studies at Clark University, received his master's in physics in 1910 and his PhD in 1911. He soon secured a research fellowship at Princeton University's Palmer Physical Laboratory, where he began his private studies on rocketry and space travel. He submitted his first paper on the subject, the navigation of space, to the magazine Popular Science News, but it was returned with a note claiming they had no plans to publish it in the immediate future. This was hardly surprising. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, most scientists saw rockets as little more than toys, dismissing them as a viable means of reaching space or as a respectable field of study for a physicist. Indeed, even contemporary science fiction featuring space travel made little use of rockets, preferring other methods such as giant cannons, anti-gravity, and even astral projection. But Goddard was undeterred and continued his studies in his spare time. In 1912, Goddard proved mathematically that a rocket fueled by a liquid propellant rather than gunpowder could theoretically reach any altitude and place substantial payloads into outer space. Goddard had in fact inadvertently re-derived the prior work of Russian theorist Konstantin Tsiolkovsky, who in 1903 published the groundbreaking treatise The Exploration of Space by Means of Reactive Propelled Devices. The paper, considered the founding document of modern astronautic theory, outlined many concepts fundamental to modern space travel, such as rocket staging and the Tsiolkovsky rocket equation for calculating the amount of propellant needed to reach a certain altitude. However, due to his reclusive nature and his inability to widely distribute his papers, Tsiolkovsky's work remained all but unknown in the West during his lifetime. Goddard nearly became a footnote in history himself when in 1913 he came down with a severe bout of tuberculosis and was forced to abandon his research post. Though he came very close to death, he eventually recovered, and in 1914 accepted a part-time teaching position at Clark University. Here, he transitioned from purely theoretical work to practical experimentation, building a series of gunpowder-fueled rocket motors with which to test various nozzle designs. These motors achieved internal efficiencies as high as 63%, validating Goddard's belief that rockets could be an efficient form of aerial propulsion. But Goddard's research soon became too expensive for his meager salary of $1,000 a year to sustain, and he reached out to groups such as the National Geographic Society and the Smithsonian Institution for financial assistance. To his delight, in January 1917, the Smithsonian agreed to provide him with a 5-year grant totaling $5,000. Clark University later contributed $3,500, while the Worcester Polytechnic Institute provided space in its abandoned magnetics laboratory for Goddard to safely test his motors. In 1919, after 2 years of research, Goddard arranged for the Smithsonian to publish what would become his magnum opus, a method of reaching extreme altitudes. In addition to his theoretical calculations on rocket performance and the results of his experiments on nozzle efficiencies, the paper included a memorable thought experiment in which Goddard proposed launching a rocket to the moon and igniting a charge of flash powder on its surface, the light from which would be just visible from the Earth. But while this section constituted only a small fraction of the entire paper, reporters immediately focused in on it, leading to Goddard being widely mocked in the press. On January 12, 1920, the New York Times ran a scathing front-page story titled, "Believes Rocket Can Reach Moon," while the next day an unsigned editorial titled, "A Severe Strain on Credulity," further ridiculed Goddard's conclusions. Other papers followed suit. Following a 1929 rocket flight, a local Worcester newspaper carried the headline, "Moon Rocket Misses Target by 238,799.5 miles." Even Goddard's colleagues joined in, with one professor asking him, "Well, Robert, how is your moon rocket going?" Despite numerous attempts to set the record straight, Goddard was unable to quell the press's mockery. In a 1920 interview, he resignedly stated, "Every vision is a joke until the first man accomplishes it. Once realized, it becomes commonplace." The overwhelmingly negative reaction to his paper changed Goddard forever. Already a shy and retiring man, over the next 2 decades he would become increasingly secretive and protective of his work for fear of attracting the same mockery. The lingering effects of his tuberculosis also contributed to his isolation, as he preferred to avoid exhausting arguments with others and use his energy productively. Unfortunately, this behavior would ultimately result in Goddard and his work falling into obscurity. In September 1921, Goddard began experimenting with liquid propellant rockets, successfully testing his first prototype engine in November 1923. After trying out a number of different propellants, Goddard settled on the combination of gasoline and liquid oxygen. During static testing, he encountered a problem that has plagued rocket designers ever since. At the ideal propellant mixture ratio, the exhaust was so hot that it quickly burned through the thin walls of the engine nozzle. Goddard solved this problem by running his engine intentionally fuel-rich to reduce the exhaust temperature, an inefficient solution, but the only practical one given Goddard's limited resources. The second challenge Goddard faced in building a practical rocket was how to keep it stable in flight, and to this end, he opted to build his pioneering 1926 rocket in an unusual upside-down configuration with a combustion chamber at the top and the propellant tanks at the bottom, the two being connected by the rigid propellant feed lines. The idea was that the low center of gravity would cause the rocket to act like a pendulum and keep it pointing upward. But while at first glance this solution seems to make intuitive sense, a closer look at the physics reveals it to be a fallacy. Flying a rocket can be thought of like balancing a pencil on your fingertip. Some mechanism is needed to constantly counteract the rocket's tendency to topple over and keep it on its desired trajectory. In simpler, smaller rockets, this is accomplished using fins, which apply an aerodynamic counterforce to keep the vehicle flying in a straight line. Larger rockets, especially those that must operate in the vacuum of space, use a set of gyroscopes and gimballing nozzles to redirect the rocket exhaust and keep themselves on course. But in the early days of rocketry, many scientists and engineers, including Goddard, believed that if a rocket was built like a pendulum, with the nozzle on top and the majority of the weight at the bottom, then, like a pendulum, the vehicle would stabilize itself and always point straight upwards. While this seems intuitive on its face, a closer examination of the physics reveals that this concept is deeply flawed. For a system to be stable, there must exist a suitable counterforce to counteract any deviations from its ground state. Take, for example, a marble at the bottom of a bowl. This system is stable because any attempt to disturb the marble is counteracted by gravity, which always returns it to the bottom of the bowl. If, on the other hand, the bowl is flipped over and the marble placed on top, the system becomes inherently unstable, as any disturbance will send the marble rolling down the sides with no counterforce to stop it. A rocket in flight is a similarly unstable system, like a pencil balanced on a fingertip. Some mechanism or counterforce is thus needed to counter its tendency to topple over. In small rockets, this is accomplished using fins, which apply aerodynamic forces to keep the vehicle on course. Larger rockets, especially those which must operate in the vacuum of space, use gimbaled nozzles to deflect the rocket exhaust and counteract any deviations in trajectory. If, on the other hand, Goddard's pendulum rocket were disturbed from its flight path by even a few degrees, the line of thrust would still point along the length of the rocket, just as it did when the rocket was vertical, with nothing providing a counterforce to correct the deviation. Furthermore, unlike a pendulum, which is hinged at the top, the combustion chamber on Goddard's rocket was rigidly connected to the propellant tanks, meaning that once the combustion chamber went off course, the whole rocket would go with it. For the pendulum effect to work at all, heavy objects would have to fall faster than light ones, a notion disproved by Galileo way back in 1592. Thus, Goddard's pendulum rocket was in fact no more stable than a more conventional design, and indeed, on its pioneering 1926 flight, it rose only a few feet before flipping over uncontrollably and crashing. Goddard quickly realized his mistake and built all his subsequent rockets in the more traditional style with the engine on the bottom, a far more convenient configuration which eliminated the need to shield the highly combustible propellant tanks from the rocket's exhaust. The Pendulum Rocket Fallacy thus represents a brief and curious dead end in the history of rocketry, and proof that even the greatest minds can get it wrong sometimes. But this was not the first baffling scientific blunder Goddard had been involved in, though in the prior case he had been on the correct side of the debate. One of the harshest criticisms leveled against Goddard regarding his 1919 paper involved his assertion that rocket engines could work in the vacuum of space. Early on, Goddard had realized that rockets worked according to Newton's third law, that is, for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction, and that the presence of an atmosphere was irrelevant to their operation. He had even proven this experimentally by measuring the thrust of small rocket motors in a vacuum chamber, discovering that the performance of rockets actually increases as the surrounding pressure decreases. But conventional scientific wisdom held that rockets worked by pushing against the atmosphere, as the author of the 1920 New York Times editorial scathingly explained. Quote, "After the rocket quits our air and really starts on its longer journey, its flight would be neither accelerated nor maintained by the explosion of the charges it then might have left. To claim that it would be is to deny a fundamental law of dynamics, and only Dr. Einstein and his chosen dozen, so few and fit, are licensed to do that." Professor Goddard, with his chair in Clark College, does not know the relation of action to reaction and of the need to have something better than a vacuum against which to react. He seems to lack the knowledge ladled out daily in high schools. Once again, Goddard published numerous rebuttals defending his scientific statements, but to no avail. It was not until 49 years later, shortly after the launch of Apollo 11, that the Times finally printed a formal retraction. Further investigation and experimentation have confirmed the findings of Isaac Newton in the 17th century, and it is now definitely established that a rocket can function in a vacuum as well as in an atmosphere. The Times regrets the error. Following the historic 1926 launch, Goddard continued to build and launch increasingly successful rockets near Auburn, but once again these activities soon outstripped his meager funds. Fortuitously, however, his research had come to the attention of a figure of great influence in the aerospace community, Charles Lindbergh, the first man to fly solo non-stop across the Atlantic. In the spring of 1930, Lindbergh met with the wealthy Guggenheim family and convinced them to fund Goddard's research over the next 4 years to the tune of $100,000 or $1.9 million today. He also found Goddard an ideal test site near Roswell in the New Mexico desert, which was not only wide open, secluded, and sparsely populated, but also had a dry climate better suited to Goddard's tubercular lungs. Over the next 11 years, Goddard and a small group of technicians would work in near complete isolation and secrecy, launching a total of 31 rockets into the desert sky. In the process, they pioneered many now common technologies like gyroscopic stabilization and thrust vectoring, and launched the first rocket-borne scientific instruments, a barometer and a thermometer, creating the world's first meteorological sounding rocket. Yet despite these firsts, the performance of Goddard's rockets was disappointing. His most successful model launched on March 26, 1937, only reaching a maximum altitude of 2.5 kilometers. Much of this lack of progress stemmed from Goddard's obsession with solitude and secrecy, which prevented him from communicating with other scientists and avoiding problems which had already been solved elsewhere. Nonetheless, the Navy was impressed by his work, and during the Second World War, he moved to Annapolis, Maryland, to develop jet-assisted takeoff, or JATO rockets, to help heavily laden aircraft get off the ground. But this would be Goddard's last hurrah. His health already deteriorating due to the humid Maryland climate, in mid-1945, he was diagnosed with throat cancer. On August 10th, Robert Hutchings Goddard died in Baltimore at the age of 63. Yet despite all his achievements, at the time of his death, Goddard and his work were all but unknown in America, and soon slipped into obscurity. But halfway around the world, there were people who had heard of Robert Goddard. In 1920, Goddard personally sent out 1,750 copies of his pioneering monograph to anyone who requested one. A handful of these ended up in Germany, where they inspired a generation of rocket enthusiasts, including a young Werner von Braun. Working from Goddard's ideas and research in the late 1930s, von Braun and his team at the Air Force Research Station at Peenemünde designed a series of increasingly sophisticated liquid-fueled rockets, culminating in the infamous V-2 ballistic missile, one of Hitler's so-called vengeance weapons, of which thousands were launched against Britain during the Second World War. After the war, von Braun and many of his colleagues were brought to the United States via Operation Paperclip to assist in the US Army's missile programs. On arriving in America, von Braun was shocked to learn that nobody had heard of Robert Goddard or his pioneering work, exclaiming, "Don't you know about your own rocket pioneer? Dr. Goddard was ahead of us all." As the space race between the US and the Soviet Union got underway in the late 1950s, Goddard and his achievements were increasingly recognized and celebrated, with the Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland being named in his honor in 1959. Today he is widely recognized as the father of American rocketry and an important pioneer in the history of spaceflight. But while Goddard saw little success and recognition in his lifetime, this seems to have done little to discourage him or his dreams of reaching the stars. Writing to science fiction novelist H.G. Wells in 1932, Goddard mused, "How many more years I shall be able to work on the problem, I do not know. I hope as long as I live. There can be no thought of finishing, for aiming for the stars, both literally and figuratively, is a problem to occupy generations, so that no matter how much progress one makes, there is always the thrill of just beginning." Thank you for watching.